Good evening and welcome to Hidden Histories. This is part of URBAN-15's e-magazine in which we're trying to bring the culture of San Antonio and Central Texas to you out there in the world via our streaming broadcast system. Hidden Histories is a component of Tricentennial celebrations here in San Antonio. We're celebrating the most recent 300 years of our 10,000-year history. And tonight's show features several interesting components of San Antonio. One of them is the art show called Common Currents, which was where 300 artists each were assigned a given year of this history, and they produced works. The second thing we're going to do is have a listening moment with one of our elders here in San Antonio, Mr. Ray Hernandez, who will be speaking of the native indigenous communities that have been living here in this river valley. We will be talking to Vietnam veteran and painter Roberto Cifuentes on his artwork and how he is trying to help other veterans who are dealing with stress and dealing with the aftermath of combat. And finally tonight we'll be speaking with Lydia Camarillo, who is the Vice President of the Southwest Voter Registration and Education Program here in San Antonio. And it is an organization dedicated to get people to register to vote and to vote. So welcome to Hidden Histories. I hope you enjoyed tonight's evening.
Frito-Lay's brand new natural style potato chips have natural country taste because they're made from whole unpeeled potatoes, sliced thicker for more potato flavor. And Frito-Lay's natural style potato chips are made without preservatives, so nothing comes between you and what grows in good country earth. Frito-Lay's natural style potato chips with natural country taste. Harvest a bag for yourself.
Me gusta.
Of course he likes the traditional flavor of Mexican food. So will you when you use the new Sazon Accent con Chiles. Try it.
Me gusta.
Sazon Accent con Chiles brings out the flavor of every Mexican dish you prepare. Pour the contents of one envelope while cooking and...
Me gusta.
You will like it too.
Sazon Accent con Chiles brings out the traditional flavor of Mexican cooking. Try it.
Well, let's proceed with our Common Currents conversation. We have a guest tonight, Chad Dawkins from the Southwest School of Art, and two of the artists who were involved with creating works. We have Ken Brush over here to my right, and the wonderful Regina Mora over here further down the way. So, Chad, you were involved as a curator, and you kind of have a good concept of what was Common Currents.
Sure. Common Currents was an exhibition that was put together collaboratively between 6 San Antonio arts organizations, Art Pace, Blue Star, the Carver Community Cultural Center, the Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center, the Mexican Cultural Institute, and Southwest School of Art, in order to bring together 300 artists to present 300 artworks, each one representing 300 years of San Antonio history for the Tricentennial. The planning for the show started in about 2017. Paula Owen, president of the Southwest School, in conjunction with some others in town, including Mary Michael Stump, my predecessor, were looking at some exhibitions that had influenced them in this idea of like a chain letter type introduction as a way to bring in as many different artists as possible from places that ordinarily one would not curate from, I guess is a good way to say it. They wanted it to be inclusive. They wanted it to be all-encompassing of representative of San Antonio, of the artists here in town. And so that's how it started.
So this chain letter concept, can you elaborate on that a bit?
Sure. So simply put, each organization would pick 2 artists, and then those 2 artists would tell 2 of their friends, and 2 of their friends would tell 2 of their friends, and so on, until it grew exponentially to reach the 300 artists. And it happened pretty quickly. It happened in about 6 months that they reached the number.
You said you might have some insight as to who those original 12 artists were here in the community.
Sure, I do know. I know that the organizations chose their initial 2 artists for reasons. It wasn't just 2 people that you thought, okay, they sound cool. ArtPace chose Katie Pell and Ray Hernandez. Blue Star chose Kent Rush and Jennifer Gavina Franco. I know for the fact that Blue Star went with Kent in the sense that he was a founding member of Blue Star, and with Jennifer as that she is currently an art student. So it's sort of history and the current time. The Carver chose John Coleman and Guy Shepard. The Guadalupe chose Jane Madrigal and Cristal Ortepuente. Mexican Cultural Institute went with Roquio Sanz and Jose Davila, and Southwest School of Art chose Ana Fernandez and Gary Sweeney.
And then those 2 sort of begat, and you got to 300.
Absolutely.
And what about the process of assigning a year to these 300 artists?
So everything got put on a list and put into a blender. So the 300 artists were amassed through, they would respond by email. They would invite 2 people, those people would respond by email. There was a list of 300 people, and then there were 300 years. And the organizers just combined this list with the 300 years. It was all completely random.
I think we have a slide here of the galleries and the years that were assigned to them. Yeah, there it is.
And so each venue represented 50 years of this 300-year San Antonio history.
Wow. So what we did tonight is we kind of randomly also asked each of the galleries to send in a few of their favorites of the entire show. And it just so happens that Kent, you ended up with 1784, and that slide, it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek approach to the Texas Historical Commission's plaques that they place throughout the state. Can you give me
It's the whole idea is it's a proposal, and somebody's proposing to make this historical plaque, and it's called Yanaguana, which is the Indian name or the Indigenous American name for the springs, San Pedro Springs, where supposedly the Spanish first founded San Antonio. And I originally was thinking about doing something that really had to do with 1784, but not much really did happen in 1784. And so I decided to kind of take a tongue-in-cheek approach and just kind of make up something that might have happened in 1784. And my whole approach to the whole process was kind of ambivalent, because 300 years based on the Spanish coming here and declaring that this was a city seemed a little bit arbitrary to me. It's kind of like, in this day and age, we decide whether we wanted to celebrate Columbus Day or even other dubious achievement awards like the Alamo. Like, everybody wants to celebrate the Alamo, or certain factions want to celebrate the Alamo. So that was kind of my take on the whole thing. So I decided to make up my own fake history, and decided that in 1784 that a group of Payaya Indians, some from the mission and maybe others that had left the mission, got together at the San Pedro Springs and had a celebration of the 8,000th year of their forefathers founding this sacred and spiritual place. And so that's what the plaque, the proposal for this plaque states.
Would you ever consider actually submitting that to the Texas Historical Commission?
Well, considering that it's fake history, I don't know that they would go for it, but and to kind of substantiate that, I have this quote from some literature from Carmen Lomas Garza that says, and it's not about the Alamo and it's not about San Antonio, it's actually about the King Ranch, but it says, but the painful prick of a cactus thorn point of a barbed wire fence at the King Ranch, the biggest ranch in America, land stolen from the Mexicans, stolen from the Spaniards, stolen from the Apaches, Karankawa, and Coahuiltecan. So that's kind of my attitude about that.
Okay, let's go to 1824, and I think Laurie had a piece on that one.
Yeah, this one is Lori Garcia Jones. Lori was in her senior year of BFA at Southwest School of Art when she made this. 1824, she titled it Essay to Santa Fe, and she's referencing French merchants passing through San Antonio on their way to Santa Fe on a trading expedition. It was just outside San Antonio, the merchants' pack animals were robbed by Indians. In San Antonio, the merchants were able to acquire carts and oxen to continue on their journey to Santa Fe. Lori took this little snippet of a story and obviously put her own illustrative spin indicative of her paintings to tell that story.
And then the 1854 entry is from Kim Bishop, a longtime friend of Urban 15, but she too was a person at SSA, right?
That's right. She was also at Southwest School of Art. Kim's piece is titled Fake Index for 1854, and the text that accompanies her piece is, in 1854, an issue of the San Antonio Ledger features a small op-ed rating women by their bonnets they wear, highlighting trends toward fancy feathered headwear. In fact, in the 19th century, over 150 species of birds were hunted to extinction almost solely for the purpose of fashion. In some cases, wealthy women placed whole stuffed birds on their heads or attached wires to birds' wings to give them a puppet-like movement. Fake Index, this piece, explores this historical idea of taking something natural and living, killing it, and then altering it to look like it is alive, playing with the concept of justifying the objectification of living things.
And then we have here a piece by Gary Sweeney, and that is from 1867.
And I'm reading Gary's statement. I was assigned the year 1867, just after the Civil War. I suppose I could have actually done some research about major events that might have taken place that year, but that would have eliminated a lot of self-amusement, which is a driving force in my artwork. This idea came to me pretty quickly and easily. My wife, who knows my artwork better than anyone, thought that I'd actually crossed the line of good taste this time. That made me love this even more.
Okay, we have a piece here from 1877, and it's a mark, and it's about trains and sheep. It was a kind of a three-dimensional glasses needed. It's kind of blurred. You have to have 3D glasses to see it. And that piece was about a very small part of Texas agriculture history, and that's the sheep industry in Texas. It was not very popular with the cattlemen,
Yeah.
and so they had to get them up to market as quick as possible. And that's about the trains that were here in San Antonio in 1877. Okay, and we have a piece here from 1888, and this is Terry Ibanez, and it's called Tree of Life, the Lands of Pedro Huizar. Pedro Huizar was part of the family that his grandfather actually carved the rose window at the mission, and then his great uncle was the man who laid out. He was the surveyor who laid out the city of San Antonio for the Spanish government. This piece here, the close-ups are of the three major areas of San Antonio that were part of the mission area, the area, the Presidio area, and then the Alamo. And then we have this Tree of Life that she uses of the San Antonio River. And Terry is very poetic in her work, and I've always thought she's a blast to work with, you know. And so thank you, Terry, for that piece. We have another piece here. We jumped to 1961 in the next slide. And This is Luis Valdera's piece, and it's the year that Henry Gonzalez ran in the Democratic Party on the same ticket with John F. Kennedy. And it was part of the Viva Kennedy clubs that helped propel Henry Gonzalez into become our first Hispanic U.S. representative. And this was a piece for the Carver Center. It was giant sculpture that said vote, and then with a rear-lit screen plexiglass image of Henry Gonzalez. And that's a very famous picture of him. It's a public domain. And in fact, that's the same picture that was painted over at a restaurant recently here in San Antonio. And that's one of those stories. We jump now to 1972. And Margarita is a ceramist. She's doing the big piece down on the River Ridge. Do you know much about that piece down there on the river?
Well, do you know that it's down by Mission Espada? It's enormous. It's really, really huge. It's a tree of life, so she's taking the traditional object of the tree of life, and she's worked through a number of community workshops throughout San Antonio to work with individuals to come up with items that will populate the tree. And so we'll have everything from basketballs for the Spurs, of course, to anything that's sentimental to people who have participated, and all of those are being slip cast into ceramic, and they will fit onto a huge steel armature to make up this enormous tree of life right along the San Antonio River, right by the Mission Espada. Oh. It's going to be really nice.
We have the next piece is 1977, and we're lucky enough to have Regina here. So, Regina, can you explain your piece?
Yeah, sure. I was, my year was 1977, so it was a very, well, a lot of things happened, but I chose when Lone Star Brewery stopped being Lone Star Brewery and became SAMA, the San Antonio Museum of Art. So that year was the christening of the building, and something that caught my attention was that the mayor at that time, Lila Cockrell, smashed a bottle of beer on the building instead of a bottle of champagne like you usually do on the ships. So that's why my piece is called Foam Over Bubbles, because, you know, so, and there was this line that the mayor said at that time that, you know, was registered on the newspapers, and it was something along the lines of San Antonians will quench their thirst, but this time for creativity and art, let's, you know, make that thirst.
Okay, the closing example we have of common currents tonight is a piece by a new artist in town, Abraham Mojica, and he is, his year was 1988, and that's the year that SeaWorld opened. And he chose orca in a trap as his expression of San Antonio in 1988. Mm-hmm. And welcome to San Antonio, and I do hope he can stay a lot longer.
Yes.
Okay, well, we've gone through some stuff. We've talked about different pieces, but Chad, now that you're here as a curator, do you see any projects or anything that we can do to continue this momentum?
Well, the effort of collaboration has continued. My position at the Southwest School is continued to collaborate with other arts organizations, including Blue Star. We're currently co-hosting a show. I'm planning a couple of collaborations with other organizations, including the McNay and Art Pace in the next year or so. So I'm personally trying to institutionally collaborate as much as possible. I do think that, you know, one thing that was interesting to me in organizing this show was the lack of organization. It was more or less the artists were here, here are the artworks, and, you know, what I got to choose was will we hang them in chronological order, or will we mix them up, you know, and how much information will we put on the label? Those were the decisions I got to make. So it was really freeing. It was a freeing experience. I chose to hang them chronologically, by the way, just it made the most sense. And we did put a lot of explanatory text because a lot of the pieces, really dealt with the history and really dealt with the time that they were referencing. And so we wanted that to come across. So all of us in the organizations worked together. We talked all the time. We decided, okay, yes, we should have, lots of explanatory text about the different years, these sorts of things. It was also great to see names I've never heard of before. I'm still meeting people that were involved with Common Currents that I didn't meet at the time. But there were, hundreds of artists represented that I had never heard of, and now I know of.
Well, the thing about Common Currents is that there were 300 Pandora's boxes that were opened by 300 artists, and they can't be sealed. So that history that's out there is now part of the community collective consciousness. And that's why I think that Common Currents was probably one of the most influential of all the artworks that was done during the Tricentennial-year. Let's see what we can do. Perhaps you would include Urban 15 in your institutional collaborative of the future and see what we can do. Anyway, thank you very much for this little bit of time. I wish we could have met with all 300 artists. Maybe that's a long-term media project online or something like that. So thank y'all very much. And we're going to go now to some pre-recorded materials with Ray Hernandez. Hope you enjoyed this evening as much as I'm enjoying it. Thank you. We've had a lot of time this year to ask a lot of questions, and we're very lucky tonight to have Ray Hernandez with us, who will help me understand what San Antonio is, and more importantly, who was here in San Antonio before we knew what San Antonio was even going to be. And Ray, thank you for coming with us, and if you can give us an idea of who you are and what you do.
A lot of our history is as a people that's lost in San Antonio. We talk about San Antonio, which to us, the original name was Yanaguana. That personified the name of these areas, which means the spirit waters, the sacred waters. And that headwaters, exists today behind Encounter College. It's a sacred place for families. And you go back there and you do archaeological studies and everything, and based on scientific, they go back almost 10,000 years. And so that goes to show that a people that have existed here has been at least for 10,000 years, according to the experts, archaeologists, anthropologists, and those that study these things through their science. But in our mind is that this is where God put us. This is the creation of our people. We became labeled by, they named us, well actually back in the 1500s when Cabeza de Vaca shipwrecked, that experience is where his experience really started the process of recording us as a people. And he lived among us for 9 years. And he became elevated because of his abilities to do what our people might have perceived as curandero type mentalities of magical, of healing. And so he became a principal person in our communities, and he wrote about it. And it wasn't until about another 100 and something years after we had guided him back to Mexico to be able to go back to Spain and tell his stories about us and everything. It was about 100 years afterwards, 150 years, when another delegation based on his writings, Frayet Massanet, showed up here in San Antonio at the headwaters there by the San Pedro Springs. And had the first Mass there, the first Catholic Mass with our people, the families of the Payayas. Those are also referred to as Coahuiltecanos or Coahuiltecans, Cholos. Those are just names that have been adapted to our communities over the things. But there's over 500 names, and the Spaniards recorded us as independent nations. But the reality is that these were clan family names, all the different names, whether the Payayas, the Pajanaptes, the Pajalates, Pacanacs, Jarames, all those were family, basically, names that identified different families. And those clan names, basically, of those families were anywhere from 20 to 80 people that would just, would be nomadic or hunter-gatherers and go seasonal people through the areas which we call our tribal lands that exist from here in San Antonio down to South Texas, this side of around the Big Bend area up there in the west, and on the east all the way to College Station up in that area and all south. And of course there were other tribes that came in and out of those areas, but those were primarily our Indian lands all the way down south to Monclova, Coahuila, Tamaulipas, Nuevo León, Northern Potosí. Those are known as our tribal lands prior to the formation of the Spanish governments and them putting the boundaries and mapping out the lands. So when they had the first Catholic Mass, this is when back then in 1691 where they named this it happened on St. Anthony's, the day of St. Anthony de Padua, and it was named San Antonio after him, after the patron saint. And so that was the head start where things started to develop. And they moved one of the original Alamos from South Texas out there around the ¿cómo se dice? Down in Rio Grande, that area, all the way back up here. It was Mission Solano. But when they got here, they converted it to Mission de Valero. And that's where the present Alamos stands today. Anyway, through that process, there was a very limited amount of Franciscan priests and Spaniard soldiers. And the majority of the people learned to adapt and started to develop these missions and establishing, of course, with the guidance of the expertise of the engineers from the Españoles. But it was our people that did the back-breaking work of putting it together that they developed, they evolved, and accepted Catholicism.
Now there must have been some like cultural and physical transformations that take place here, because you're dealing with a nomadic concept, and all of a sudden you're dealing with stone and making a mission. So you know.
Well, there was some forced labor involved in it over time. I mean, let's be honest about it. But ultimately, they understood that we also had other enemies out there, and like they say, you know, the enemy of your enemy is my friend. You're my friend, then, you know. So you establish that, and so a lot of it was for survival, and whoever, you know, whatever it was, the rationale behind it, that was the beginning of a process of us as a people evolving. And so when you really talk about San Antonio and understand San Antonio, that the San Antonio de Béjar, I mean, it existed, you know, all what you call it northeastern Mexico, all the way up to almost Utah. That was Texas. It was a country to its own.
Now, in modern times, though, there seems to be either a ignorance or a disbelief, or even deciding not to accept that as reality, that people were here long before the 1836 wars or the 1700s, and somehow or another, you've been able to continue existing. How do you do that in an environment which refuses to accept your existence sometimes?
Well, you know, it's not important what others call you, it's important what you call yourself, you know, and the culture and the communities, you know, the bond of the community, of the culture, the traditions, those things are so deeply, I mean, when you have 10,000 years of living a certain way and then making that transition, you know, and the people were seeing that things were changing in that period of time. There was other tribes that were being forced from their Indian lands from other parts of the country where you had other Europeans invading. You got to remember that before the 13 colonies were established, which was 70 years after our missions were built. I mean, we have the first vaquero here listed in the records, in the burial records, as a vaquero, which was a Native American, 38 years before George Washington was born. I mean, that's significant. And so there's archival records. The Spaniards and the Catholic Church, considering the times and the technology of what was available, they did an amazing thing of recording everything by hand and penmanship in their native language in Spanish, telling the stories and the baptismals, the confessionals, all of these different things, and how the native people learned to adjust and how to adapt to the new situation. Our families are very adaptable, and it evolves from coming from a heart life and good work ethics. You know, when you're a hunter trying to survive, and you know, you can't just walk up to the H-E-B and buy your groceries, and you have to rely on the things that Mother Earth provides for you besides the four-leggeds. You know, it's you know, especially when you don't have hunting rifles. Huh? I mean, our people had to run them down sometimes, the deer, just to, and with a knife and catch them. They would just keep running. I mean, long distance runners that would find a way to catch these animals and bring them back and do the things they needed to do to survive. And when you have that for 10,000 years of existence, everything else seemed like a cakewalk.
Tonight, in honor of Veterans Day and the whole month of November for our warriors, I'm very honored that a dear friend of mine from many, many decades now, Roberto Cifuentes, is with us. He walks the path of an artist, and he has brought a lot of things to my understanding of what it takes to be a defender of our country. Mr. Hernandez, who was speaking just before us, is a sixth generation member of a family that has been involved with military service for this community. And tonight we have Roberto, and he's going to share with us some of the artwork that has come from his life. So Roberto, first of all, thank you for everything that you've done. And I've always admired you since I first met you, and you were going through some tough times as recently coming back from Vietnam, and you know, you and I have been just friends for many, many years. So let's start out with, hey, guy.
Yeah. First of all, I want to thank you and Kat for inviting me. Really honored. And I have always painted. I've been a painter. I used to sell some of my pieces in middle school. Not a lot, but a few. Vietnam did a lot of changes to me, yeah, and I think that's why I appreciate UTSA so much. I believe a lot in vicarious knowledge, and I produced a lot of my Vietnam pieces while I was at UTSA. And, I was going to speak about my family, like Mr. Hernandez. My family is also a military tradition. My dad, World War II, and my uncles, Stone and Silver Stars, and my two brothers, also Vietnam. So the paintings, when I started doing the Vietnam paintings, it was a little difficult. It took me a while to be able to calm myself subjectively and objectively to what I needed to do. So my early work, and I'm an individual that I work on 2 or 3 series. I got not only the Vietnam, I have a religious series, I have a 9/11, I have another one that's a transparency of lust, and stuff like that. So it's very, I believe a lot in letting the artwork speak for itself.
Well, like this piece here, it's kind of like, has very deep, almost Mexican muralistic concepts, yet it's dealing with fatigues, OD, olive drab. What year was this piece?
This was a very significant piece for me because later on, I did this one in school. Later on, I made it into a triptych, and it was my senior exhibition piece. And but it's about an ambush, and ambushes were weird, especially at night. Sometimes you didn't know who you caught in there. I didn't want to do it too realistic, so that's why I went with the abstract, so as not to be too specific with the images. People tend to accept them more when they're abstract pieces. They look like cartoons, so,
But did it help doing this?
Oh, goodness gracious, yes. At first it didn't, but as I worked, yes, and then I got more specific, because I decided after this one, no, I don't want to do too much of the blood and gore of Vietnam, so I started doing images of friends. And this one was the first piece that I actually did of Vietnam. It's a self-portrait, and it's in a art book that Arizona State University put out. They had a national call out for Chicano artists, and I was very, very fortunate to be selected as one of them. And this one is in that book. And the thing with the flowers and stuff, it's the title of this piece is Flower War Child. Before Vietnam, and before I joined the service, I was in Vista, and I was a real peace freak, anti-war, with the signs and stuff. And then I dropped it when my friends started coming back from Vietnam. Some wounded, some in body bags, and I said, wow, I'm doing the wrong thing. Plus, my family is a military family, my brothers, my father, my uncles. So I dropped the sign and dropped my deferment and went into.
Let's see another of your works here. This is with one of the large works.
Instead of old glory, it's young glory. Kind of like they were youngsters. And this one I did also in UTSA. I was very fortunate to have a class with Susan Shatter, and she did large pieces. So I said, man, I got to do a large one like her, and that's where this came from.
And the next one. There you are in your studio.
Those are the negative pieces. The negatives was also, I did a independent study class with Camarillo, and I was fortunate to see agreed, yeah, you can do it. So I did 4 of them.
And the next one there? This is more recent, right? One of your altars?
Yeah, that one, I got a phone call from New York from a curator. Somehow she found out that I did altars. And she asked me if I would do an altar to honor all the guys we lost in Vietnam. She was part of the National Vietnam War Museum. So I thought, well, I'd be more than honored to do it. But the thing, I started thinking about it, and I said, wow, no, I don't want to put sarapes and stuff on it. So I thought about it, and I said, you know what, I'm going to shroud it with images. It's got about 100 figures in it. And this was really, really very difficult, but very healing. When I was through with it, and the people, the reaction I got from the people, I've had guys that come and cry. So, you can imagine, if you can move somebody like that, with what you're going through and the pain, and have somebody identify with it too. I mean, I can't describe it, it's the feeling.
Well, your work is beginning larger scale, and you're getting a wider recognition throughout the country for this kind of work. But here in San Antonio, we don't see enough of it. And just the other day, on Saturday of this week, we went to the rededication of the Vietnam mural on the west side, and that altar was in one of the buildings there at an auto parts store or something that you had.
Other sales.
And I was really touched by the number of people that left there with crying and with tears in their eyes. You know, it was something. And you know, in these times where we're putting troops on borders, we're moving into several war zones. We've been the last 2 decades. It hasn't stopped.
Well, we all know that.
And you guys come home, and not everybody gets to work it out through art. And I mean, you've done a remarkable thing.
Because you guys have realized that the Afghanistan war is the longest war we've had, and we're still there. We don't get any news or anything about it, but it's. I've had friends. I have a painting I did of Matt Taylor. He was here in at Banksy, and we went to see him. There's a bunch of old timers like me in Vietnam with this kid. His mama was real surprised when we told her that he's our brother, and we're here to do whatever we can for you and for him. And the lady, I hugged her and gave her a cap and gave her some stuff and told her that, see, I was here in the same hospital. See, I was here 14 months. And once your son is already here, he's going to make it. A boy died a week later. So it was, for me, it was very significant. I painted him, and I kept the painting for a while, hung it on my wall, and, you know, I kept it at home until I decided it was time to give it to where it should go, to his mom. And she was, you know, she still texts me, and, you know, we became good friends. She's a Gold Star mother.
Well, Roberto, thank you for the friendship and things that you've shared with us, and you and your wife have been very supportive of Urban 15, and you know, we see you at all the art events in the city, and especially where young artists' work are being displayed, and people sometimes don't understand the significance of artist therapy and artists as being a catharsis moment, and you know, you've really been an inspiration to a lot of people. So thank you, bro. Okay.
Thank you.
We're going to return with a little segment with Ray Hernandez real quickly, and follow that by Ms. Lydia from the Southwest Voter Registration Project. Thank you. But the controversies that have come up have to deal with mainly burials and cemeteries. And in recent times, it comes up over and over and over again, all the way, I read something about, right, in 1936 or something, when they were making the new post office, they found things.
Well, well, yeah. Well, now we're talking about my grandparents there. That's where I got a lot of my education in that history, the oral history of our families. And my grandfather was born in 1876 and baptized there at San Fernando Cathedral. And so when you think about that era, that time period, that was a real thing for that thing. I mean, there was no automobiles, there wasn't the technology and the televisions and the communications that we have today, and you know, so it was we're living off the land basically, period. So he brought that instance, and of course his father was born in 1821. So that time period that existed between 1821 from independence from Mexico all the way to my grandfather, 1876, you had a civil war. You had the not only the Civil War, but the Battle of the Alamo in 1836, and then, you know, we got recognized here as citizens of the United States till 1846. You know, so a lot of things happened in that era that were first-hand or second-hand information to my grandfather that passed it on to me. One of the things that really crowed at that he felt was somewhat of a betrayal of the church was when they built the Santa Rosa Hospital over family cemeteries. Not only that, but also the cemeteries that got destroyed over there at Mission Valero, which is the Alamo. And so, you know, back in the 50s, you know, we would walk from the Calle Brazo, San Josito, all the way downtown. And he would show me the areas around the Alazan courts where they used to have the little rancherita back then, the San Fernando Cemetery where some family members were buried there in Colorado, and go travel all the way. I never forget when we got to I can't even remember the street, but there was this big, huge lion on the side of the wall. You know, a pharmacy. It was a pharmacy.
Chapa.
Yeah, Chapa.
Yeah. Pharmacy.
Yeah. And I was always amazed with that lion, you know, but we would walk down, and when we go by the Santa Rosa Hospital, he would say, you know, they built this over our cemeteries, you know. And you know, he didn't show a lot of emotions, but you could tell there was a sense of disappointment. And he would go and take me to the Alamo, and he would do his little blessings and, you know, meditate. There used to be a gazebo there in the plaza. They used to have bathrooms downstairs. I know, because I had to go down there and use them, and we would take our little sandwiches and we'd eat up there, and he would tell me a lot of the stories of life and things like that. And around the 1960s, 62, I remember telling him I was already getting ready to go into high school. I told him, I said, you know, Pa, this is, you know, you're telling me all these things, but, you know, of what, I mean, what's the purpose? I was trying to explain what's the purpose. And he basically looked at me, and there was this expression in him that there was a sense that he was trying to understand and make me know the importance of our history, of how this was our roots. This is where we come from. That even though that we continue to change through the mezclada over a period of time, because we cannot control who our grandchildren or our children are going to marry, but as long as you know the traditions and you know the culture and you know the history behind it, you'll always survive as a people, you know, even though we continue to change.
Now,
you know,
all of this is really personal to you.
Yeah.
Really personal to you, and I find things that are very personal to me, particularly about land grants and things that about appropriation and stuff. But a lot of people just don't care. They don't think that it's relevant. Why do you think it's important that you retain and insist on keeping this history visible?
Because it's the story of America. It's the story of Texas. As far as we've gained as a country, and we've come a long way. It's only 240 years old. It's a baby. It really is a baby. It hasn't even found itself. But when you look at the 240 years of where the slavery, civil rights, and all things, we've made a lot of accomplishments. But at the same time, it hasn't come with a high price, and it's still being suppressed. It's still trying to be suppressed. You know, people need to understand what this country has developed into. This is the United States of America. America just doesn't apply to this country. It applies to Mexico and Canada. That's North America. It's a continent. And I love this country, you know, but I also love my history, and I make no apologies. You know, we allow the people up in the Northeast that they can fly their Irish flags during their celebrations. They can fly their British flags in honor of the Queen, of which we helped them win an independence for. but God forbid if they fly a Mexican flag over here that used to be their lands. You know, where's the parity of this? Why is it so hateful? They're both Europeans. The Spanish language is European just as much as the English language. So as a Native American, hey, both languages are foreigners to us. You know, we have our own language. So, but I don't want to get into those places. So our families refuse to assimilate, but we integrated. And integrated in our terms means that we're going to be good citizens, we're going to work hard, we're going to send our college. We want to be protected by the Constitution equally under the protection of the Bill of Rights that's extended to all human beings. Okay? There's a lot of things that I don't understand. Okay? I don't understand the attraction of one man to another. I don't understand it. But you know what? They're entitled to the protections of the law just as anybody else. Just because I don't understand it doesn't give me the right to say it's wrong or right. I don't know. For me, maybe it's wrong for me. But who am I to judge to say something about somebody else? And so all of these things get muddied up in all of these controversies and all that, and this deep racism that exists, and it does exist. I see it. You know, the sad thing about it is I've been called a racist as you just don't like white people. I'm married to a German-Scottish woman. My God, come on. and she descends from the Dirch families that fought at the Alamo. You know, and my son and my daughter from my first wife is from a native wife. My son comes from the present wife that I've been with her for 36 years. How can I say that my son is not just as big an equal member of our tribal community as my daughter? Why should I look at him any different? Why should anybody in the community? See, we don't look at him. The community doesn't look at him as being different. He's one of us. He grew up around the drum. He grew up around the songs. He grew up around the medicine. He grew up around these customs. So how can we turn around and deny our own kind? So now we have a government that turns around and says, you don't meet the definition of what an Indian is. A definition. A definition. Which other race in this country has to fulfill a definition as to who they are? Who gives that government the right to say who my parents, my grandparents, my ancestors are, and my history to say that I am not Indian enough because I don't meet the John Wayne mentality of what an Indian looks like? Okay? I am who I am. People tell me, what is your Indian name? And I always tell them, I want you to listen carefully because it's complicated. And they listen, and I'd say these in lectures, and I tell them, listen carefully, Ray Hernandez. That's my Indian name, because that's the Christian name that was given to me.
Well, listen, I really have learned a lot in this conversation with you, and we need to meet again in a few weeks, a few months, and continue this story about what is San Antonio and who the people are in this community. Thank you very much for your time, Ray. I appreciate it. And if I forgot to tell anybody, this young man here is a former San Antonio police officer as well. Thank you.
All right. I appreciate it, man.
Hi. We're going to close our evening here with a very, very strong personality and a very important person in our community. And that's Lydia Camarillo, and she is the vice president of the Southwest Voter Education Project. I guess it's Southwest Voter Registration and Education Project. And this is an organization that I saw evolve from the very, very beginning with high school buddies observing two other Central Catholic grads, who formed this organization. But tonight is a significant night because we are on the eve of an election. And elections are made not by the candidates, but elections are made by the people who vote. And it's very significant that not that long ago in San Antonio, it was hard to vote. And organizations have come and gone, and this one, how many years now are you on this?
This year is our 44th anniversary. Next year we're getting ready to celebrate 45 years. And but for the fact that Willie Velasquez, who was the founder of Southwest Voter, if he hadn't been blacklisted, we would be 50 years old next year.
That's true. That's true.
And he was blacklisted because they didn't want him to register Latinos, Mexicanos, Chicanos.
Well, my first participation in voter registration was in the spring of '72.
Hmm?
And it was with a lot of the UMAS and Raza Unida people, and we were working West Side voter registration, and that was really exciting time. And that's, running into Willie and George over there working on the West Side, and they were talking about creating this nonprofit organization, and Ricardo Rios was hanging with them. We can talk about the history, and it's wonderful, but I would like to know about the mission. How did the mission happen?
I think it's important to discuss the mission and then even talk about what's at stake at this election. This election probably is the most important election in my lifetime, in our children's lifetime, and an election that I would argue will either continue to take America truly is in a crossroads. Are we headed in a place where diversity and communities of color and Mexicanos and Latinos are not respected, or a place where we have our place in America society and we will be respected just as we respect others? So Southwest Voter started with the idea around 1968. Many of the LULAC members who then decided it's time to start an organization that fights discrimination through the courts, modeled after the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Many of the LULAC members decided that they were going to start the organization. Willie is part of that conversation because it's happening here in San Antonio, all this conversation in 1968. And when Willie was having the conversation, his point was, we also need to register voters. And so that's why I was saying, Maldiv this year and throughout next year is celebrating 50 years. Southwest Voter was every year that we would apply, or Willie would apply to get the 501c3 status, he was denied. One day, Willie asked Mario Bledo, who was not only a LULAC member before Maldiv became a reality, Mexican American Defense Fund, but he was one of the presidents, and at the time he was the president of Maldiv. And he goes and says, Willie, Mario, help me out. What's going on here? So it happens to be time, sometimes the stars align themselves. And Mario is supposed to be in DC that particular week. So he says, well, let me go find out. He goes to the Justice Department and he finds out that Willie Velasquez has been blacklisted and will not be given the authority to start an organization to register Mexicans and Latinos in South Texas and San Antonio specifically. Since we've opened our doors, we've registered 2.7 million Latinos and worked with other communities. We've trained 150,000 Latino leaders. We are also filed a lawsuit against the Texas voter ID, the redistricting, and the Senate Bill 4, which is the profiling bill. That the profiling law that they'll stop us just because we look morenitos, prietitos. So when Willie started, he literally had a folding chair, a folding table, a rotary phone, and a phone book, and he would call and say, can I come by and register you to vote? And that's how it started. So this election, as we speak, we are contacting tomorrow morning. We have been calling these same voters with live contacts. But tomorrow morning, we're going to do a quick robocall to 20,000 voters, asking them to turn out to vote. This will be voters that no one else is calling. They're young, they're new, they're newly registered. What I mean new is they just got registered. This will be the first time they vote in a midterm election. And we're doing the same in other places, but our effort has grown while at the same time it continues to be a lot of what Willie was about. Willie started the organization with one concept. The way we vote, the way we participate in America's democracy is by having a conversation, looking at the person eye to eye, or talking to them on the phone, or doing both. A lot of the campaigns throughout the United States, including the one right now that is the most interesting in Texas, since we are sitting in San Antonio, Texas. It is the first time in more than 25 years that Texas is considered a competitive state at the U.S. Senate level. And the question is, will Beto O'Rourke win, or will Cruz get reelected? And that is the question that's going on, that the nation is watching in this election. So when Willie started, it was the door-to-door conversation, it was grassroots, but it wasn't just about talking about elections. It was about having a conversation with the leaders of those communities, which we still do today, about what's at stake for them, what's important for the voter, not for you and I, for the voter that we see, because every voter has a different interest. It may be that the streets haven't been paved, the mattresses haven't been picked up, in spite of it being 2018. There are still communities that do not have roads, that the kids are worried about, the parents are worried about the students, and the schools are falling apart. We know that in San Antonio that's still the case. And that's why Southwest Voter was started. But this election, I would argue, is the first time since I've been involved with Southwest Voter for over 22 years with the organization, and involved politically since I was 18 in various organizations, and I helped register some of the first voters through Southwest Voter when I was 18 in college. I have to tell you that I've never understood or seen how we could feel so powerful and yet so powerless in this election when the President of the United States says racist, sexist things. Fascism is at the top, and it just doesn't make any sense that in America we as voters are allowing it. So as part of that, we are nonpartisan. We're not telling voters how to vote, but we are asking voters to consider that every election has an impact on their lives directly at the local, state, and national level. And so as I was saying, the U.S. Senate seat is competitive. We don't know what's going to happen until tomorrow night. There are, every midterm cycle, Texas doesn't vote. It's not that Latinos don't vote, it's that no one votes in Texas. In 2014, only 33% of those that were registered to vote cast their vote in Texas. Only 33%. That's the same case in 2010. We do a little better in 2012 and 2016 in presidential cycles, but we are a southern state where little to no investment exists to turn out voters. And so the turnout is just dramatically low. Well, as of when early vote closed on Friday, Texas had already surpassed, that goes for Latino voters, white voters, black voters, other voters, the 2014 turnout numbers. We think that we will probably see, we'll know tomorrow night exactly, that about 7 million people will cast their vote. We think that 20% to 24% will be Latino. It's hard to say because the registration, there was about, I would say, about 500,000 people that registered to vote from March to now, to the deadline of October the 9th in Texas. We think that half of that is Latino, but since the last time that we counted every 4 years to get a feel for it, in spite of the fact that we had 2016, there were 1.5 million new voters that were registered to vote in Texas.
Now, I've often wondered if the problem with people not getting involved with voting is that they don't know how to make decisions. And they go to a grocery store and buy whatever they saw advertised on TV. They go and they buy foods for their children because it's on the Saturday morning cartoons. And they don't have to make decisions if they're being fed information that seems like it's the right thing to do. So why should they don't get involved with voting because it means having to make a decision. And what is it about the decision-making process that makes it so difficult for people to vote?
Well, there is a narrative at the national level that Latinos don't vote. And so I'm going to come back to your point, but I need to say this. The national narrative and the state narrative is that Latinos don't vote. And I have to tell you that that's not true. The Latinos have been voting since we've been counting. The registration numbers continue to grow and continue to turn out. We expect that over 1.3 million Latinos will cast a vote in Texas, 2.6 in California, 2.6 million in California, 9 million total. Now that might not sound like a lot, but we have to remember a couple of things. First of all, 1/3 of the Latino community is underage. 1/3 of the Latino community are not citizens. And of those that are registered to vote or eligible to vote, we are at about 16 million registered Latino voters of about 27 million that are eligible to vote. But every cycle, every year, 800,000 people that are Latinos turn 18 and are U.S. citizens are now ready to go vote if we just get them to vote. Now, to your point, we've been having conversations with Latinos both through surveys to understand why they are not voting or what inspires them to vote. And voters across the United States vote for something or against something. And Latinos are not that different. The problem is that the median age of a Latino voter is 22 years old. What do we know about a 22-year-old? He or she is not in college. We are unique. Few of us have graduated and gone to college and graduated. I guess that's the order, not the other way around. But really what these young men and women are doing is that they're having young families and they're surviving, and so they're paying attention to the elections anywhere from 5 to 10 days out. What do we know? In Texas, it's 30 days out before an election before we can register to vote. That's the deadline. If you are not thinking about elections until 5 to 10 days out, you've missed an opportunity. And in fact, as we're calling people and we're asking them, is there anybody else in the household that needs to be registered? Please register them today. They will not be able to vote in the next election. Until the next election, because the deadline was October 9th. They're saying, oh, we kept thinking we had some time. We kept thinking we had some time. And in fact, in California, when Proposition 187 passed in 1994, many of the people called and said, how do we stop Proposition 187? And I said, well, you have to vote against it. But can I vote against it? I said, of course you can vote against it. First of all, are you registered to vote? And they were already calling when it was almost time for the election to take place. And California had a 30 days out registration deadline. Well, at that point, we were able to move it. And in fact, they have same day registration. So anybody who missed the October 22nd deadline, California and Colorado can show up and register and then vote. That's not the case here in Texas. So to your point, there are some folks who don't understand everything and don't know all the propositions or all the candidates, and they are worried. But that's not why they're not voting. They're not voting because they're busy surviving, living, and they're paying attention till later. And second, 60 to 70% of those that are eligible to vote, that are registered to vote, are not being contacted by anybody. So if you're surviving and living.
Now, is this a cross-cultural, cross-race situation of the same dynamics influencing the lack of voting?
It's yes and no. It's varied. A median age of a white voter is 37 years old. So they're an older community. The African American community is older. So we're expecting that about 1.3 million Latinos will vote in Texas this cycle. And we may be underestimating, because we always cite conservative figures, given what we're calling the Trump factor. And the African American community will be about 850,000 African American people will vote, voters will vote in Texas. So they're a smaller number in Texas, but they vote at a higher rate because they're an older community. So to your point, they also have a different history. The African American community, they've seen their elders and their family members not only register to vote and vote, but they've been doing it for much longer time. They saw their families, they have a legacy of people dying and fighting for the right to vote. And so they have a different experience than we do. We have a young electorate, and it's up to us, our age, to tell the young folks, Generation Z, as in zebra, and the millennials, that they have a responsibility to vote for those who cannot vote, for the children that are being caged, that we should not be seeing that shouldn't be happening in America.
Well, I do remember the poll tax was still in place when I became conscious that there was a thing called voting, in 6, 7 years old, and the numbers of people that were working against that poll tax there in that period, and experiencing the euphoria of, particularly when Henry Gonzalez was running for office, and that race also when he ran for governor, that kind of comment he threw out there, that fireworks. And then moving towards single member districts was a really critical step. But when you look at the gerrymandering of not only city council districts, but of state districts and Congress, what do we do, particularly about the mapping?
We fight. That's why we sued. Right before the census count of the last cycle, we expected that Texas would gain 3 to 4 new congressional seats. That is exactly what happened. Texas gained 4 new congressional seats. Maldiv and other groups, and of course Southwest Voter, we presented maps that allowed for the existence of the current African American gains by congressional members that are African American. And on the state house, not only African American, but the Asian, and then other groups. For instance, we were able to draw, so let me step back. Before we had the new 4 congressional seats, we had 7 seats that were drawn majority Latino, and there were also the African American seats on the congressional level, and then we gained 4 seats. We present a map that provides the opportunity to draw 10 Latino majority seats. So from 10 to 10, but then they draw the maps, the legislature, and they give us 6. They take away 1. So we have 4 new congressional seats, but now we have 6. And we end up suing them. So we go back to our 7, because the 23rd, which is right here in San Antonio, was retrogressed. We were able to fix it. And then we gained the seat that where Doggett is sitting, the seat in Dallas. And so now we went from 7 to 9 seats. So we have 9. If we do a good job of counting the census the next time in 2020, when we draw the lines again in 2021, we are expecting that Texas will again gain 4 congressional seats. If we do not do a good job of counting, because the citizenship question stays and we lose this lawsuit. In fact, we're going to court this week and next week to determine that. If we lose, then Texas will not only lose those potential 4 new seats that we're going to gain, but we will lose the 4 seats that we gain, because less people will be counted, and it's based on the people that are counted that is decided how many congressional seats each state gets, and that goes the same for the state houses and the Senate seats.
Well, the irony is that everybody on the talk show radio say, why do you hyphenate yourselves? Why do you add this Mexican-American hyphenated name? But everybody forgets that was the name that the Census Bureau developed.
Gave us.
In Utah, Wyoming, New Mexico, Arizona, California, and Texas in 1910, because prior to that, Mexicans were not included in the census.
Correct.
However, those that were born in the United States, they figured out, let's hyphenate them. We can get more people in the census and get more congressmen. So the motivation to hyphenate was not by the people, but by the desire to get more congressional seats in those western states. And it was the most conservative people in those western states that pushed for the hyphenation. And it's a strange history when you go back and read that period.
Redistricting and drawing the lines is always about power and who's going to sustain and maintain the power. And so that's what we're looking at. But for us at Southwest Voter and Maldiv, the Latino community, we want to find ways to make sure that there's representation. Let the Latinos have a real choice when they vote. And that's why we're doing that.
Okay, well, look, this is a long conversation. We should do this again soon. And thank you for being a part of our Hidden Histories, because people need to know that they need to get out there and vote.
Well, thank you.
Raise your hand in your classroom. You know, how many of you went this or that? I mean, people need to vote starting from childhood.
Please don't forget, tomorrow is Election Day, November the 6th. Go vote. Take someone to vote with you, and then take someone else to vote. Thank you.
Thank you,
Su voto es su
Lydia.
voz.
This is wonderful.
Gracias.
Okay.